I took the same $6 he once tossed at me and placed them on the table between us. "This is what you gave me, son," I said. "So this is exactly what I'll give back." It sounds small, doesn't it? $6. But when that money is handed to you by the child you carried, the boy you fed and sheltered and prayed over, it doesn't feel like currency. It feels like dismissal, like erasure, like your entire life's worth boiled down to a crumpled bill and a cold sidewalk. This is not the story of a dramatic fight or a courtroom battle. It's the story of a quiet breaking and a quieter becoming. It's about what happens when a mother forgotten and cast aside uses her lowest moment not to collapse, but to rise, not to scream, but to rebuild. If you've ever been told you were too much or too old or simply in the way, if you've ever wondered whether it's too late to start over, then stay with me, because the day my son abandoned me in the cold with just $6 was the day I finally started winning. My name is Joanne Mercer. I'm 63 years old, a widow, and for most of my life I've been what people used to call a homemaker. I cooked, cleaned, raised a child, supported a husband through illness and worry, and years of quiet struggle. I didn't build a career. I didn't go to art school, even though when I was young I dreamed of painting murals in sunlit studios. I didn't open the little art shop I used to imagine tucked in a corner of a sleepy town. I raised a family instead. I was useful in the ways the world doesn't pay much attention to. After my husband Harold passed, after the casseroles stopped coming and the calls dried up, our home felt more like a mausoleum than a comfort. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like him not being there. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was aching. That's when my son Nathan made the suggestion. He was 38 then, a senior software engineer living in the suburbs with his wife and 2 kids. Always practical, always forward-thinking. "Mom," he said one afternoon, seated across from me at the kitchen table I had polished 1,000 times. "It doesn't make sense for you to stay in that house alone. It's too big, too quiet. Why don't we sell it and you can help us put a down payment on a new place, a bigger one with a yard. You can move in with us. We'll all be together. Together." That word hung in the air like a promise. He talked about family, about how much Liam and Nora loved their grandma, about how helpful it would be to have someone around the house while he and his wife Claire worked full-time. It sounded like a lifeline, a way to make my life mean something again. So I agreed. I sold the house Harold and I built a life in for nearly 4 decades. I packed away the photo albums, donated the mismatched mugs, folded the quilts my mother had sewn by hand. I handed my son a check, a 6-figure sum representing every careful decision Harold and I had made in our working years. And I moved into a room they called the guest room. But it wasn't really a guest room. It was a storage space. Boxes lined the walls, some labeled Tax 2012 or Claire's Yoga Stuff. The mattress was a pull-out, and the one small window overlooked a side fence. There were no curtains, no nightstand, just a standing lamp with a flickering bulb. Still, I tried to make it home. I hung a small cross-stitch I'd made years ago. I placed Harold's framed photo on a plastic crate beside the bed and called it a nightstand. I folded my clothes and stored them in 2 small bins under the couch bed. It's temporary, I told myself, but temporary has a way of stretching out when no one bothers to shorten it. At first, Claire was polite. Not warm, not rude, just efficient. She liked things a certain way. She labeled the pantry shelves, left cleaning charts on the fridge, and reminded me gently at first not to give the kids juice past 6 p.m. Nathan, he was busy. Always on calls, always with headphones around his neck. We used to talk more back when I packed his lunch and listened to his long, wandering stories about comic books and dinosaurs. Now our conversations were mostly about groceries, pickups, and the school calendar. I made myself useful. I did the laundry, picked up the dry cleaning, scrubbed the bathroom tiles on my knees, and made sure the kids got to school with lunches packed and water bottles filled. I made dinner most nights, usually something with a vegetable Claire wouldn't eat, but the kids liked. I stopped buying fabric softener because Claire said it gave her migraines. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for anything. but little things started to sting. I remember one morning Liam came into the room where I slept. "Grandma, are you coming to the play tonight?" he asked, eyes wide with excitement. Before I could answer, Claire called from the hallway. "Grandma's busy, sweetheart. Let's not bother her." "I wasn't busy. I was folding his socks. And then there was my birthday. I hadn't told anyone. I never made a big deal of it, but somehow I thought maybe Nathan would remember, that he might stop in, ask me to sit for a cup of tea. Nothing extravagant." Instead, that morning, Claire asked if I could take out the trash bins because they had to leave early for a dentist appointment. I pulled the bins down the steep driveway in the rain, my hands aching from the cold. That night, no cake, no card, not even a passing happy birthday from either of them. The kids had made me a drawing the week before in art class. It had my name on it in glitter. But I never saw it again. One evening, after putting the dishes away and finishing the kids' reading homework, I paused to rub my wrist. The arthritis was acting up again. Nathan walked in from his home office and glanced at me. "Mom," he said, half joking, half irritated, "I swear you have a new ailment every week. Maybe you should see someone about all that complaining." I opened my mouth to answer, but the words caught in my throat. That night I sat in bed and stared at the ceiling, Harold's photo in my hand. I whispered, "Was this supposed to be better?" I think the moment it changed for me was so small, so quiet, no one else would have noticed it. I was making pancakes one morning, as I did most Saturdays. The kids loved them. I always added a touch of cinnamon, just like Harold used to. Nathan walked in, sniffed the air, and said flatly, "Don't burn them this time. Claire hates the smell. Burn them." I'd made these pancakes for years. He used to beg for them. I nodded, turned back to the stove, and felt something deep inside me start to pull away, like the loosening of a knot you didn't realize was choking you. Later that evening, I felt a chill in my spine. Not from the air, from something deeper. My joints ached more than usual. My head throbbed. I didn't mention it. Claire had a deadline, and Nathan had been in a mood. I figured it would pass. A warm shower, a good sleep. But it didn't. And in that moment, I understood something. I was invisible in this house. Not out of malice, not out of cruelty, but because I had let myself become convenient. I had faded into the background noise of their busy lives. That night, lying on the thin pull-out mattress with only an old quilt and the photo of Harold beside me, I realized I didn't belong there. Not really. Not anymore. But I didn't know yet just how cold it would get. Or how far I'd have to go before I remembered how to feel warm again. That came next. It started with a tremble I couldn't explain. A deep, cold ache that settled into my bones and wouldn't let go. I thought maybe it was just fatigue. Maybe I'd stood too long on the tile floor, or strained myself lifting Nora after she fell asleep on the couch again. But by nightfall, my skin was flushed and clammy, and every movement felt like I was carrying 100 pounds of bricks in my joints. I tried to sleep it off. I wrapped myself in the thinnest blanket they'd left on the pull-out, hugging Harold's old sweater to my chest like it could will the heat back into my limbs. But the fever built itself into a slow-burning storm behind my eyes. My head pulsed with pressure, and I felt like I was floating above the room in a daze, watching my own body suffer from a distance. At some point in the middle of the night, I knew I needed help. Not much, not even a doctor. Just someone to bring me a glass of water, maybe something for the fever. Just a voice to anchor me. I pulled myself up with shaking hands, legs barely steady, and shuffled to the hallway. The house was quiet. The kind of heavy quiet that only appears when you're deeply unwelcome. I stood outside Nathan and Claire's bedroom door for a moment, pressing my palm against the smooth white paint. I didn't want to knock. I didn't want to disturb them. But the cold had settled into my lungs, and I could feel something dangerous curling behind my ribs. So I knocked, soft, hesitant. There was a rustle inside, then the door creaked open a few inches. Nathan stood there in his sleep, shirt hair, tousled eyes, squinting in the dim light from the hallway. "Mom." His voice was flat, not concerned, just mildly annoyed like I had interrupted a good dream. I think I have a fever," I whispered, swallowing hard against the dryness in my throat. "I'm not feeling well. I just thought I should let you know." He didn't open the door any wider. He didn't step closer. He looked at me the way someone might look at a leaky faucet or a ticking clock, like I was a minor inconvenience best handled quickly. "You can't stay here," he said, voice still low but firm. "Nora has asthma. If this is the flu, we can't risk her getting sick." I blinked. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard, that I'd hallucinated it. I don't have anywhere else to go, Nathan," I said, barely above a whisper. "This is my home," he sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Mom, this isn't personal, okay? But Claire has a huge pitch next week and the kids can't afford to be out of school. Just a few days. Go to a motel, maybe? Or, I don't know, a friend's place. I hadn't seen a friend in years, not since before Harold passed. I hadn't been out to lunch or to church or anywhere besides this house and the grocery store in I don't even know how long. I don't have money for a motel," I said, the words landing heavy between us. "I gave everything I had to this house." Nathan didn't blink. He turned, disappeared into the bedroom for a moment, and came back with something clenched in his hand. He reached out and pressed it into my palm. Crumpled bills, soft from too many washes. "Here," he muttered, "it's $6. Should be enough for a bus ride and a coffee or something. You always said you were good at getting by." I stared at the money in my hand, at the green and gray ink smudged under my trembling fingers. That was the value of my existence. $6. 6. I wanted to say something. To scream. To ask how he could be so cold to the woman who held his forehead through fevers and whispered lullabies into his nightmares. To the woman who had traded every dream she'd ever had for his shot at a better life. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I turned back to the guest room. I didn't cry. I didn't fall to the floor. I just walked in and started packing. I pulled out the battered suitcase I'd kept tucked under the bed, the one Harold and I had taken on our last vacation to the Oregon coast before his diagnosis. The zipper stuck halfway and the handle had lost its padding. But it would do. I folded 2 sweaters, a pair of jeans, the scarf Liam had given me for Christmas 2 years ago, my Bible, a framed photo of Harold from our anniversary, a bag of Tylenol half full, the last of my lotion, and the $6 which I placed in the inside pocket of my coat. It was cold. The thermostat had dipped low after 10 p.m., and they never adjusted it at night. My hands shook as I zipped up my coat, the collar thin and threadbare. My ears burned from the fever. My legs barely worked. As I pulled the suitcase down the hallway, its wheels thumping against the floor like a final reluctant heartbeat, I heard a creak. I turned and saw Nora at the top of the stairs holding the banister in her tiny hand. Her eyes were wide, too sleepy to be scared, but full of confusion. She opened her mouth to speak. Before she could say a word, Claire appeared behind her and gently turned her around back toward her bedroom. I didn't say goodbye. When I stepped outside, the air hit me like a slap. It was the kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin. It sinks in and makes a home in your lungs. The door closed behind me with a quiet click. Not a slam. Not a shout. Just a click like the lid of a box shutting. A sound so small and yet it echoed in my bones. I stood there on the front step for a few moments, unsure of what to do. My fingers were already going numb. The fever made the streetlights blur. My suitcase leaned against me like a tired old dog. I started walking. I didn't know where. Just away. I passed houses with lights still glowing in the windows, families laughing in front of televisions, the smell of dinners long finished clinging to the air. I looked through those windows and saw lives I would never be part of again. By the time I reached the bus stop, I was shaking so badly I could hardly sit. I sank onto a metal bench, pulled my coat tight across my chest, and stared out into the night. My whole life had led to that moment. Every dish I ever washed, every scraped knee I ever kissed, every bedtime story, every dollar handed over, all of it had ended right there, on a rusted bench in the cold with $6 in my pocket and nowhere to go. But what I didn't know, not then, not as my vision swam and my body screamed for rest, was that I was standing at the edge of something else entirely. Because sometimes when everything you've ever known disappears, when you're left stripped bare, that's when the real life begins. Not the one you lived for everyone else, the one you live for yourself. I don't remember the exact moment I collapsed. I'd been walking for what felt like hours, each footstep clumsy and detached as if my body no longer belonged to me. The fever had taken hold completely by then, turning my legs into rubber, my vision into shadows. My suitcase bumped along behind me, its wheels skipping over cracks in the sidewalk as loyal and exhausted as I was. The last thing I remember clearly was the smell of something warm and sweet in the air. Cinnamon, maybe? Or nutmeg. I saw a little storefront on the corner lit by a soft golden glow from the inside. There was a painted sign above the door, slightly worn but still cheerful. Maple and Hearth. I barely made it to the edge of the window before my knees gave out. The sidewalk came up fast, cold, and rough against my cheek. I didn't even have the strength to lift my hands to break the fall. Somewhere in the distance I heard a bell tinkle. Then footsteps. Then darkness. When I woke, I was wrapped in something soft, a blanket. The air smelled like yeast and apples and something savory in a slow cooker. I blinked, trying to focus. The room was small but clean, exposed brick, old wooden beams. A narrow window let in the faint gray light of early morning. "Hey there," a voice said low and steady. "You're awake." I turned my head. Sitting in a rocking chair near the corner was a woman, probably close to my age, maybe a few years younger. Her hair was silver in places, braided down one side, and she wore a simple flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her face was kind-worn in a beautiful way, like she'd lived honestly. "I'm Clara," she said. "This is my bakery. You passed out right in front of the shop. I tried to sit up, but my head spun." "Easy now," she said, standing and coming over with a glass of water. "You had a fever and you were freezing. I got you upstairs, gave you some Tylenol, and let you sleep it off. You scared me half to death, you know." I took the water slowly, my hands trembling. "Thank you," I whispered the words barely there. "No need to thank me," she said. "You looked like someone who'd gone too long without being seen." I know that look. She didn't press. She didn't ask for my name or why I'd been out in the cold or where I'd come from. She just tucked the blanket around me again gently, like someone who'd learned how to care the hard way. Later that morning, when I was steady enough to walk, Clara helped me down to the bakery. It was a tiny place, maybe 6 tables total, but it smelled like heaven. There was coffee brewing, something baking in the oven, and a soft jazz song playing on an old radio near the window. The kind of place people come not just to eat, but to rest. She handed me a cup of hot tea, peppermint steaming strong, and set down a small plate with 2 slices of buttered toast and a soft-boiled egg. "Eat," she said. "You look like you haven't in days." She was right. I hadn't. Each bite was a blessing. I chewed slowly, letting the warmth anchor me, letting the taste remind me I was still here. I watched as customers came and went, an older couple picking up pastries, a young woman with a laptop ordering the same coffee twice in 2 hours. They smiled at Clara. She smiled back, knowing their names, their favorite orders. She belonged here. I sat quietly, tucked into a corner table by the window. I didn't speak much. I didn't have much to say. But I observed, and I breathed. That was when I noticed the small rack on the counter, a neat row of scratch-off lottery tickets nestled between the tip jar and a jar of homemade dog treats. A sign above it read, $2. For luck, no refunds, Just hope. I pulled the coat tighter around me and reached into the pocket. My fingers found the last 2 crumpled bills. All that was left from the 6 Nathan had handed me like an afterthought. I'd spent the rest on the bus and a bottle of water from a vending machine outside the station. $2. I didn't need more tea. I didn't need anything at all, really. But something about that sign called to me. Not the money, not even the chance. Just the idea of choosing something for myself. Something completely useless and impulsive and mine. I stood, slowly walked up to the counter and pointed to the second ticket from the left. "That one," I said. Clara looked at me with a raised eyebrow but didn't question it. She took the bills, handed me the ticket, and gave a soft smile. "Beginner's luck," she said. "You never know." I nodded, slid the ticket into my pocket, and went back to my table. I didn't scratch it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The truth was, I didn't expect to win anything. I didn't even know what the prize was. I just wanted to feel like I'd made a decision. Any decision. Not because someone else needed something from me, but because I did. The bakery quieted down as the morning wore on. Clara wiped down tables, hummed a tune I vaguely recognized, and checked the timer on the oven. She didn't ask what I'd do next. She didn't ask where I was going or if I had anywhere to stay. Instead, as I finished the last sip of my tea, she came over and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You got a place to sleep tonight?" she asked, matter of fact. I paused, embarrassed by the lump in my throat. I shook my head. "Well, she said the upstairs room's got a bed. It's not fancy, but it's warm. You're welcome to stay a few days. Maybe help me a little when you're up to it. I could use a hand with the morning muffins." I looked up at her, searching for the catch. But there wasn't one. Why, I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. She shrugged. "Someone did the same for me once. Paid forward, you know I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I simply nodded, pressing my lips together." That afternoon, I went back upstairs to rest. The room was still cozy, still smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee. I took off my coat, set the lottery ticket on the nightstand, and lay back down. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet murmur of the world below. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not safe exactly, but seen. No one knew who I was. Not Clara, not the customers, not the city itself. But here I was, in a room above a bakery with peppermint tea in my belly, and $2 gone, not on survival, but on hope. The ticket was still on the table beside me. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, the real prize was already unfolding. Someone had asked me if I was okay, and meant it. When I opened my eyes the next morning, the first thing I noticed was the sunlight. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was gentle, golden, and warm, filtering through a thin white curtain and casting soft streaks across the wooden floorboards. It felt like something out of a painting I once wanted to make back before I tucked all my dreams away to raise a family. I didn't feel good, not exactly. My body still ached, my throat was sore, and I was weak. But the fever was gone. And with it, something else had lifted, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I lay there under Clara's quilt, listening to the faint clink of coffee cups and the soft murmur of morning chatter drifting up from the bakery below. It was the first time in years I'd woken up and not braced myself for someone else's schedule, someone else's mood, someone else's to-do list. I was alone, and strangely that felt like safety. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. My suitcase sat open on the floor where I'd left it. My coat was draped over the chair. And there on the little table by the window was the scratch-off lottery ticket I'd nearly forgotten about. I reached for it without thinking, more out of curiosity than hope. It still felt silly. Childish, almost. But I found a penny in the bottom of my coat pocket, smoothed out the ticket, and began to scratch the first box. Then the second, and the third, another 750. I stared at the card in disbelief, blinking hard as if my fever had returned and was now playing tricks on my vision. I flipped the ticket over, reread the instructions. Match 3 identical numbers to win the corresponding prize. I checked again, then again. It was there. Plain as day. I'd just won $750,000. For a long moment, I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't gasp or scream. I just sat there with the ticket in my lap and my hands shaking. Because the thing that hit me first wasn't joy. It was fear. I didn't know how these things worked, who to tell, what to do next. And most terrifying of all, what if this was just another dream? Some cruel, fleeting mirage that would disappear the second I tried to touch it. Clara knocked gently on the doorframe a moment later, holding a fresh cup of peppermint tea. "You're up," she said warmly, stepping inside. "How are you feeling?" I couldn't speak. I just held up the ticket like a fragile piece of glass. Her eyes widened. "No," she whispered, crossing the room and taking it carefully from my hands. She turned it over, squinted, read the fine print. "Joanne, you didn't just win a free donut. This is the real deal." "I think so," I said, my voice barely audible. She whistled low and sat down beside me. "Well, honey," she said, patting my knee, "I think you're going to need more than tea today." After the initial shock wore off, after I'd held the ticket so many times it started to feel like part of my skin. Clara made a phone call. Her niece Meredith worked as a tax consultant and financial planner. Smart as a whip, discreet and kind. She came by that afternoon in jeans and a navy blazer with a folder already prepped. She didn't ask me a lot of personal questions. She just smiled and said, "Let's keep this quiet. I'll help you claim it safely anonymously. No press, no surprises." I nodded, still floating somewhere between disbelief and panic. Meredith walked me through everything. What to sign, when to expect the funds, how much would be taken for taxes. After it all, she said I'd walk away with just over $510,000, $500,000. More money than I'd ever seen in my life. More than Harold and I made in 20 years combined. More than I gave Nathan. More than I could even conceptualize. "You'll want a new checking account," Meredith said gently, "in your name only, and maybe a different mailing address." I nodded again, my mind swimming. That night I sat back in the window seat of the little room upstairs, watching the street below. The city didn't know. Nathan didn't know, no one did. And I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. Because for the first time in my life I had something no one else could lay claim to. Not a gift, not a favor, not a sacrifice dressed as love. Something that was mine. It wasn't about the money. Not really. I didn't want a mansion or jewels or a new wardrobe. What I wanted, what I had never had, was a choice. I could choose where to live, what to do, who to let in. And no one, not Nathan, not Claire, not anyone, could take that from me now. I didn't cry when I saw the final number on the ticket. I cried when I realized I wouldn't have to ask anymore. Not for permission, not for space, not for kindness. I could simply live. I stared at the street lamps glowing against the dusk and whispered to myself, "Now what? Where do I begin?" And the strangest thing happened. I smiled. Not a grin, not a laugh, just a quiet, private smile. Like the beginning of something, like the first note of a song I hadn't dared sing in years, because it was finally my time to choose the tune. I never thought signing a lease could make me cry. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and drizzling. I stood in the tiny leasing office of an older brick building just off Cherry Street, holding a set of keys in one hand and a pen in the other. My name, Joanne Mercer, was typed at the top of the contract in clean, blocky print. No cosigner, no emergency contact, no in care of, just me. When I finished signing the last page, the property manager, a young woman with dark curls and chipped green nail polish, smiled and slid the keys across the counter. "Welcome home," she said. I nodded and whispered, "Thank you," even though my throat was too tight to speak it clearly. I tucked the keys into my palm like something sacred and stepped out into the rain. The apartment wasn't grand. It was a third-floor studio with creaky wooden floors and windows that stuck in the corners. But it had a south-facing bay window that overlooked a quiet city park, and in the late afternoon the light poured in like honey. There was a kitchenette with exactly 3 cabinets and a stovetop so small it barely held a kettle. The bathroom tiles were old but clean. Someone had left a tiny hook by the front door for keys. It was perfect, not because it had everything, but because it was mine. I didn't move in all at once. I took my time. I bought a real bed. Queen-sized firm, but forgiving with a headboard that didn't rattle. I chose a soft beige comforter, the kind that made me feel like I was floating in clouds, and a few throw pillows in deep green and blue. I picked out a small wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs, both sturdy. For the first time in my life, I walked into a furniture store and made decisions not based on what was cheap, or what Harold would like, or what matched the rest of the house. I chose what I loved. I found a little plant shop tucked behind a florist downtown, and bought 3 houseplants, a pothos, a snake plant, and a shy peace lily that reminded me of something delicate but enduring. I placed them on the windowsill. I talked to them as I watered them, laughing quietly at myself. We're all starting over, aren't we? And I bought a lamp. Not just any lamp, but one with a stained glass shade in warm amber and rose tones. When it lit up, it made the whole room glow like dusk. I turned it on every evening, even if I wasn't reading, just because it felt like a gentle presence. One afternoon, as I unpacked the last of my things, I came across my old clothes. The faded cardigans, the stretched-out sweatpants, the blouses with buttons missing or threadbare collars. I looked at them, at the person I had been while wearing them. A ghost, really. A shape molded by service and invisibility. I folded them neatly and placed them in a donation bag. I didn't feel guilty, not even a little. I wasn't throwing away who I'd been. I was making room for who I was becoming. The next day I walked into a department store and did something I hadn't done in over 40 years. I went to the makeup counter. The young woman behind it was polite, slightly surprised when I asked for help finding a lipstick. Any occasion coming up, she asked kindly. No, I said, smiling. Just me. We settled on a shade called Cranberry Flame. It was bold, almost too bold. But when I looked in the mirror, something sparkled. My lips looked fuller, my face looked alive. And behind the lipstick, I looked like someone who had something to say. That same afternoon, I walked into a hair salon a few blocks from my building. It smelled of eucalyptus and blow-dryer heat. The stylist, a man in his 30s with silver-rimmed glasses, asked me how I wanted it cut. Short, I said. No more buns. Something light. Something that moves. He nodded with a smile. Fresh start, I chuckled. Something like that. As the scissors snipped and the weight of the past fell into a pile around my feet, I felt my spine straighten. My head felt lighter. My scalp tingled with a strange, quiet joy. When I left the salon, I passed a mirror in the window of a bakery and had to stop. I almost didn't recognize myself. There I was, a woman with sharp eyes, short hair, and a flash of cranberry red across her lips. I tilted my head and studied my own reflection. Not bad, I thought. Not bad at all. That evening, I sat by the window drinking chamomile tea and watching the park. A man walked his dog. A little girl balanced on the curb like it was a tightrope. A breeze shifted the leaves in slow spirals. I didn't think about Nathan, or Claire, or the way the house used to creak after midnight. I thought about how I could hear myself breathing, and that I realized was the biggest difference of all. In this space, I didn't have to shrink. I was learning to take up space again. A few days later, while at the community center dropping off a donation, I saw a flyer pinned to the bulletin board. Beginners Watercolor. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 8 p.m. I stood there staring at it for a long time. I could already feel the old hesitation creeping in. You're too old. What's the point? You've never really done it. But underneath all that noise, something else stirred. A memory. The way I used to doodle in the margins of Harold's crossword puzzles. How I always lingered in the art supply aisle. How I used to imagine opening a tiny studio where people came to learn how to paint sunsets or still lifes. I tore off one of the tabs at the bottom. That Tuesday, I walked into the classroom clutching a small sketchbook and a brand new set of student-grade watercolors. The room was filled with people of all kinds. Young, old, quiet, chatty. No one knew who I was. No one knew my story. And I didn't offer it. I took a seat near the window where the light fell just right. The instructor, a woman named Martha with paint on her sleeves and kindness in her voice, welcomed us with a simple prompt. Draw what calm looks like to you. I dipped my brush into the water and touched the paper. My hand trembled. Just a little. The brush hovered for a second, but my heart didn't shake. That night, for the first time in years, I picked up something, not because it was needed, not because someone else expected it, but because I wanted to. Because it felt like the start of something soft and true and mine. As I painted a single line of blue across the page, soft, uneven, alive, I heard my own voice in my head, quiet and certain. I'm blooming in silence. And that was enough. I wasn't good. There's no graceful way to say it. My first few watercolor paintings were uneven, stiff, uncertain. My trees looked like broccoli stalks. My skies were all the wrong shade of blue, and whenever I tried to paint a person, they came out shaped more like potatoes than people. Each Tuesday and Thursday, I walked into that classroom with quiet hope and left with a mix of humility and frustration. I'd stare at my little palette so full of potential and somehow still manage to turn all those gorgeous pigments into a muddy brown mess. Martha, our instructor, never raised her voice or made anyone feel small. But she didn't sugarcoat either. After one particularly clumsy painting of a bridge and a sunset, she walked over, looked at it for a long moment, and said kindly, "Joanne, try fewer strokes. Let the color breathe. You're overthinking it." I nodded and smiled politely, but inside my heart sank. Not because she was wrong, she wasn't. I was trying too hard. Every brushstroke felt like a test I had to pass, and when it didn't come out right, it felt like I had failed something more than just a picture. One night after class, I walked back to my apartment under a sky smeared with clouds. I clutched my sketchbook to my chest like a child with bad grades. I wanted to throw it away. I wanted to say, maybe this just isn't for me. That familiar voice crept in, the one that always showed up right when I was starting to believe in something new. It whispered things like, too old and why bother? But something held me back. His name was Gerald Pierce. He sat 3 chairs to my left every class, tall with silver hair and kind eyes. He wore corduroy jackets even when it was warm, and his fingers were always stained faintly with paint. Gerald wasn't flashy. His work wasn't loud. But there was a gentleness to his brushwork. Soft fields, quiet lakes, a bowl of fruit rendered with such attention it made you look twice. He never offered advice unless you asked. He never interrupted anyone's process, but he noticed things. After that class where Martha gently corrected me, I sat in my usual spot, silently packing up my supplies, trying not to let the disappointment leak out through my hands. Gerald leaned over slightly and said in his steady voice, "You know it's okay to be terrible at something when you love it." I looked at him, startled. He smiled. My first month I painted 5 different apples. All of them looked like deflated balloons. That made me laugh. Just a little. Then he added, "The trick is not quitting before you get to the 6th apple." From that night on, Gerald and I started chatting a little before and after class. Nothing deep, nothing personal. Just 2 people with stained fingertips and a shared stubbornness to keep showing up. Sometimes we'd talk about the weather or the strange buzzing light over the back row. He told me he used to be a cabinet maker, that he took up painting after his wife passed away to quiet the house. He never treated me like a tired old woman picking up a new hobby. He spoke to me like a peer, like someone worth hearing. A few weeks later, our class took a weekend field trip to Willow Lake, a little spot about 45 minutes outside the city. I almost didn't go. The thought of being out in nature exposed trying to paint in front of others, especially when I still felt like a fraud, was terrifying. But Gerald gave me a ride in his old station wagon. He brought thermoses of hot coffee and wrapped peanut butter sandwiches in wax paper. He didn't ask if I was nervous. He just talked gently the whole way there about the way light changed on water, and how clouds were trickier than people gave them credit for. The lake was quiet, still mostly frozen at the edges with tall grasses poking up like brittle fingers. We each picked a spot to set up. I sat on a low bench wrapped in a thick scarf, my knees aching slightly as I bent over my sketch pad. I stared out at the lake at the way the trees on the far shore looked smudged and soft, like someone had run their finger through the sky. I didn't try to make it perfect, I just painted. The brush moved without asking permission. I used fewer strokes. I let the water do half the work. And when I was done, I sat back and looked at the page, and for the first time I felt it. Peace. The painting wasn't brilliant. It wouldn't win awards. But it looked like how I felt in that moment. Calm, present, unburdened. Gerald walked over after a while holding his own sketchbook. He glanced down at mine and gave a soft nod. Now that he said looks like someone who's stopped trying to impress anyone. I smiled. Took me long enough? He didn't say anything else, just sat beside me on the bench, both of us staring out at the water. Two middle-aged strangers who had somehow wandered into the same quiet corner of healing. When I got home that evening, wind-chapped and sore, I taped that painting to my living room wall. Right above my little dining table under the stained glass lamp. When the light hit it just right, the blues shimmered and the brushstrokes looked almost deliberate. I stood there staring at it for a long time. This was mine. Not for Nathan, not for Harold, not for anyone's fridge door or school fundraiser. Just for me. I sat on the couch, turned off all the lights except the lamp, and stared at that painting until the sky outside turned the same shade of blue as the water in my picture. Then I laughed. Not loud, just a soft, surprised chuckle. Because there it was, that feeling, that thing I'd buried under years of laundry and to-do lists and strained smiles. I'd wanted this. I had forgotten. Life had made me forget, but somewhere deep in my bones I remembered now. This was what I had longed for. Not the prize money, not the silence of a clean apartment, not even the freedom from Nathan's expectations. What I had longed for was to be a beginner, to try, to mess up, to get better, and to be allowed, just once, to love something without needing to be good at it right away. That night I turned off the lamp, brushed my teeth, and crawled into bed with sore fingers and a full heart. The painting still glowed faintly in the dark. And I whispered to it like a secret I'm not done yet. The past has a strange way of finding you. It doesn't always come crashing through the door. Sometimes it slips in through the quiet, the stillness you fought so hard to build. It hides behind the voice you haven't heard in months, ringing from a number you once memorized but tried to forget. For me, it came in the form of a phone call on a Thursday morning. I was in the middle of sorting brushes in a mason jar, the ones I'd washed and lined up after class the night before. Outside my window, the park trees were starting to bloom. Tiny green buds, eager and hopeful. The light through the glass was gentle, making my little apartment feel like a safe cocoon. Then the phone buzzed. Just once. Then again. I glanced over and saw the name flash across the screen. Nathan. I stared at it for a few seconds. Maybe more. Long enough for the soft hum of the world to go silent. The old me, Joanne from 7 months ago, would have picked it up before the second ring. Heart racing, voice eager, hope bubbling up before reason could catch up. She would have prayed for kindness, begged for a thread of warmth. But that version of me no longer lived here. Now I waited until the fourth ring. Then I answered. Hello? A pause on the other end. Not long, but enough. Then Mom. His voice was soft, syrupy. The kind of sweet that makes your teeth hurt. It's me, Nathan. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch, let him wonder what kind of version he'd reached. His old mother, or someone new. I saw something, he continued. There was this little article in the Gazette about a woman who won the lottery. They didn't give your full name, but it mentioned a painting class. And the bakery. And I had a feeling. I looked down at the table at the tiny painting I'd left unfinished, a vase of daffodils caught in morning light. He cleared his throat. Mom, we've been thinking about you. A lot. The kids. They miss you. Especially Hannah. She keeps asking when Grandma's coming home. I didn't know how to explain. I let out a quiet breath. Not angry. Just tired. I'm glad they're doing well, I said. My voice was calm. Not cold. Just steady. Another pause. We should see each other, he said. Really? Sit down. Talk things through. I thought for a moment, then answered. All right, we can meet. Oh, okay. Great. I could come by, or maybe meet somewhere near the house. I smiled to myself. Of course, his turf. No, I said gently. We'll meet at Clara's bakery. You remember it, I'm sure. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. He hesitated just for a breath. Sure, Mom. That works. We'll see you there. I didn't say I love you. I didn't say I missed you too. I just ended the call and set the phone down beside the brushes. Then I sat very still. The article he mentioned had been a small human interest piece in the local paper, a paragraph tucked in the lifestyle section. It didn't give my full name, just J. Mercer, a local woman who found herself homeless last winter, now studying watercolor and rebuilding her life after a surprise lottery win. It even mentioned how I'd found refuge at a local bakery. It was meant to be inspiring. But to Nathan it had been a breadcrumb, a glimmer, a reason to come sniffing around again, and now he was coming. The next day I dressed with care, not vanity, not performance, just quiet intention, a deep burgundy sweater that hugged my shape in a way that reminded me I was still a woman, a pair of new ankle boots I'd bought with my own money, soft, leather-firm steps. I dabbed on a little lipstick. Just enough. And I wore the earrings Harold once gave me on our 15th anniversary. Not for sentiment, but to remind myself I had lived a whole life before I became disposable. Clara's bakery was quieter on Fridays. The usual rhythm of clinking cups, low conversation, and the hum of the espresso machine filled the space like music. She met my eyes the moment I walked in. Without a word, she brought over a steaming cup of chamomile and placed it in front of me. Then gently, she touched my shoulder. Just once, firm, steady. I'm here, she whispered. I nodded. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. I took a seat in the back corner, the same one I'd occupied the night I won the ticket. The light streamed through the window just right, falling across the table like a spotlight for a scene I hadn't auditioned for, but had chosen to star in anyway. At exactly 3 Huzzer, the door chimed. Nathan stepped inside. He was dressed casually. Jeans, a button-up coat open. Behind him trailed Hannah and Liam, both a little taller than I remembered. They looked around curiously, scanning for the version of me they expected. They didn't see her. Not at first. Then I lifted my hand slightly, fingers barely moving. Nathan's eyes landed on me and widened. He looked stunned. Not because of anything I'd said, but because he didn't recognize the woman sitting before him. I watched the moment of realization dawn on him. He blinked, recovered, gave a stiff smile, and nudged the kids forward. Mom, he said, sliding into the booth. You look great. Thank you, I replied simply. I turned to Hannah and Liam and offered them a warm, sincere smile. It's good to see you both. We made small talk, school, soccer, art projects. I listened. I nodded. I sipped my tea. Nathan did most of the talking. His words bounced around the table, trying to fill the space I no longer allowed him to control. Then finally, I leaned back slightly and looked him straight in the eye. So I said softly, "What made you think of me all of a sudden?" The question hung in the air like a feather, weightless but impossible to ignore. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. But no words came. I didn't push. I just let him sit in it. Because the truth was, I already knew the answer. There's a moment. Just one. When you look into someone's eyes and realize they've come not to reconnect, but to rewrite. Nathan sat across from me in Clara's bakery, hands folded, eyes soft with carefully measured regret. He glanced at the children, then back at me as though waiting for me to fill in the silence. "Mom," he started slowly. We didn't know where you went." I didn't respond. Not at first. I let him sit with it. "We were worried," he added, "Clara especially. The night you left, it was like you disappeared. There wasn't even a note." And there it was, the rewriting. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to a version of me that would nod, maybe apologize for causing concern, for not saying goodbye properly, for making him look bad. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I kept my voice even. "I didn't disappear, Nathan. I left. After you told me I was a burden. After you said I can't carry you anymore, Mom." I remember the words clearly. He blinked. I leaned forward just slightly, keeping my tone warm but unwavering. "You tossed $6 on my bed and told me to find a shelter. That's how I left." Nathan's jaw tensed. He looked down, then back up. "It wasn't supposed to go like that. I was under a lot of pressure. Claire had a huge client presentation, the kids were getting sick, and I—" He shook his head, frustrated. I panicked. I said nothing. I just waited. After a moment, his voice dropped lower. "We were struggling, okay. I lost a major contract that month. The mortgage payments were behind. Claire, she was already talking about separating. That was the truth, not the polished version. Not the one rehearsed for sympathy. The panic hadn't been about my illness. It had been about the life he was barely holding together, and the sick mother he saw as one more fragile thing that might break it." I reached slowly into my purse and pulled out something I hadn't touched in months. A small folded bill I'd kept tucked in a zipper pocket, flattened and worn with time. $6. 1511. I placed them gently on the table between us. His eyes widened. "This," I said quietly, "was what you gave me. The price of letting go. The measure of my worth to you at that moment." He looked ashamed. I didn't need him to be. I wasn't doing it to hurt him. I wasn't reliving the past. I was setting it down finally with all the weight it carried. "I'm not angry," I added, watching his reaction carefully. "But I'm no longer confused either. I used to think I must have failed you somehow. That maybe I hadn't done enough, hadn't given enough. But I see it now." "What do you mean?" he asked softly. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "But I don't owe you either." That was the difference. For years, I'd carried the guilt, the unspoken obligation to be useful, to be needed, to stay small and out of the way. Even when I had nothing left to give, I kept pouring from an empty cup, convinced that motherhood meant permanent servitude. But that wasn't love. That was sacrifice misnamed. Nathan looked at the $6 on the table like they were on fire. He didn't touch them. "Mom," he said finally, "I didn't come here for money." "I know," I replied. "You came because you heard I had it." He winced. "Would you have come if I hadn't won?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to." The silence said everything. He rubbed the back of his neck, glanced at Hannah and Liam, now quietly watching the birds out the window. "I want things to be different," he said. "The kids, they need you." I smiled sadly. "And I love them, deeply. But Nathan, love can't grow where there's no respect. And you made it very clear that I was no longer welcome in your life. That's not fair." "It's not?" I asked gently. He opened his mouth, closed it. I reached across the table. Not toward him, but toward the children. I touched Hannah's hand, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. She smiled a little, unsure but not afraid. Then I turned to Liam and leaned over to kiss his forehead just lightly. No one stopped me. And finally I looked back at Nathan. "You closed a door that day," I said softly, "and now I've walked too far to return through it." He swallowed hard. "So that's it." "No," I said. "This is not punishment. It's peace. It's not revenge. It's resolution." He looked at me, really looked, and I could see something flicker in his eyes. Not defeat, not anger, but the first glimmer of understanding. I stood up slowly and tucked the $6 back into my purse. Not because I wanted them, but because they no longer meant anything. That debt had been paid. I looked down at the table, then at him. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Nathan. I truly do. But it's not here anymore." Then, turning to the children one last time, I smiled with all the warmth and truth I had in me. "Remember, you can always visit me," I said, "but ask your father first." I reached for my coat, slipped it on without hurry, and walked toward the door. The bell chimed softly behind me as I stepped into the afternoon light. I didn't look back, because some doors don't need to be slammed. They only need to be closed with grace. Sometimes joy doesn't arrive with a bang. It doesn't come crashing through the door or sweep you off your feet. Sometimes it tiptoes in quietly, through a sunbeam on a wooden floor, a brushstroke that feels just right, or a voice that says, "You should share this." That's what Martha said to me one evening after class. She stood behind me looking at my painting of the wooden chair in snow. A simple scene, no grand flourishes. Just one chair, old and worn, sitting alone under falling snowflakes. "It's honest," she said gently. "Lonely but calm. You should submit it for the winter light exhibition. The gallery downtown is accepting entries." I shook my head. "Oh, I'm not a real artist." She turned toward me. "Joanne, maybe it's time you stop saying that." That night I sat with the painting at my kitchen table under the warm light of my stained glass lamp. The snow looked so soft, the chair so still, and I saw it clearly for the first time. It was me. It was the version of me that sat in Nathan's guest room, invisible and waiting. It was the woman I used to be, frozen in place. But no longer. Now it was a memory, a symbol, a marker of how far I'd come. So I did it. I submitted the painting. A week later I received a call. The gallery had chosen it for the exhibition. It would hang alongside 15 other works, all themed around solitude and winter. I called Gerald immediately. His joy was so genuine, so unfiltered, that I could hear him smiling through the phone. "I'm wearing my good jacket," he said, "the one with elbow patches, for the occasion." On the night of the opening, he picked me up with flowers in hand, irises and eucalyptus, my favorites. He didn't say much as we drove, just hummed an old tune from the radio and tapped the steering wheel in rhythm. The gallery was bright and buzzing, people milling about with little glasses of wine and small plates of cheese cubes. I stood in the corner for a long time, my coat still buttoned, unsure how to move through a space like this. Then I saw it. My painting, framed and hanging on a clean white wall with a small card that read "Solitude in Stillness." J. Mercer. I didn't cry, but I felt something deeper than tears, something solid, like belonging. Gerald took my coat and guided me gently forward. "Go stand next to it," he whispered. "Let people see the artist." So I did, and for the first time in my life someone pointed at something I made and looked at me with admiration. "You captured something quiet," a woman said, studying the chair. "It feels like someone waiting, but not helpless." I smiled. "That's exactly right." That evening, Gerald handed me a wrapped gift tied with twine. Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook, blank pages, thick and smooth beneath my fingertips. Tucked in the front cover was a handwritten note for all the paintings you haven't made yet. I hope I get to see them all. I didn't say anything. I just touched his hand, quietly overwhelmed. That night, we sat in his car outside my apartment. I looked at him and said, almost without thinking, "Do you ever dream of going somewhere new?" He turned to me, surprised. "All the time. I want to paint in Italy," I said. "I want to sit in the countryside in a place that smells like herbs and old stone and just draw." He smiled. "Then let's go." And 2 months later, we did. We flew into Florence on a warm April afternoon. The air was thick with the scent of olive trees and fresh bread. I could hear church bells ringing in the distance and birdsong unlike any I'd heard before. We stayed in a little villa just outside of a quiet hill town. Mornings were slow and golden. I'd wake early, make strong coffee on the stovetop, and carry my sketchbook outside while Gerald read the paper beside me. Each day I painted, church towers and flower stalls, stray cats and faded shutters, faces I saw in cafes, the shadows of ivy against ancient walls. My hands moved freely now. Not perfect, not even skilled some days. But sure, there was no fear in me anymore. No question of whether I belonged. One morning, as I stood in a vineyard sketching the way the vines curled around old posts, Gerald walked up behind me and placed a postcard in my hand. It was already addressed to Clara's Bakery. On the back, I had written, "Each day I watched the sunrise from inside myself." I sent it with a smile. I could still hear Clara's laugh in my memory, her hand on my shoulder, her quiet faith that I'd land on my feet. I knew she'd pin that card by the register, tell every customer who glanced at it. She's painting in Italy now. That evening, Gerald and I walked to the top of a nearby hill. The sun was low, the sky turning rose gold. Below us stretched the valley. Stone houses, lavender fields, winding paths, all bathed in quiet light. I sat on a rock, pulling my sweater tight around my shoulders. He sat beside me and didn't say anything for a long time. Then softly he asked, "Would you like to grow old with me?" My breath caught. He wasn't asking for an answer in that moment. He was just offering something real, something steady. And I knew, yes, not just to him, but to all of it, to late starts and long roads, to blank pages and blooming late, to being seen not for what I'd given, but for who I was becoming. So I turned to him, took his hand, and said simply, "Yes." And just like that, in a place full of ancient light and spring blossoms, I began a new chapter. With nothing left to prove and everything still ahead. The lake doesn't speak in noise. It murmurs in soft ripples in the hush of pine needles rustling above the water in the patient rhythm of days that no longer demand anything from you. That's what I learned in the first month of living by it. Gerald and I moved into a small cottage nestled beneath tall trees just off a gravel road where the mail came once a day, and the world felt infinitely far away. The house wasn't grand. 2 bedrooms, a wood-burning fireplace, and floors that creaked when the wind blew too strong. But it had warmth. It had light. And it had quiet. We spent our first week sanding the hardwood floors until they gleamed with their own kind of memory. I painted the walls a soft golden yellow, like butter and sunlight. Gerald hung shelves in the kitchen and built me a long, narrow table near the biggest window for my paints. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's home. I felt rooted. I found whiskey at the county shelter. He was a 7-year-old Labrador mix with tired eyes and stiff joints. His tag said, "Not good with stairs," and I laughed when I read it because I wasn't either. When I knelt beside his kennel, he didn't bark or wag. He simply walked over, pressed his head against the wire gate, and sighed. And something in me sighed back. I brought him home that day. He rode in the passenger seat with his chin on my thigh the whole way, and that night he curled at the foot of my bed like we'd always belonged to each other. We walked together every morning by the lake, slowly, kindly, 2 creatures learning to move at their own pace. He limped more when it rained. I ached more when it snowed, but we never rushed. Gerald called us the Goldens, two old souls who'd earned their peace. On Wednesdays, I taught watercolor at the local community center. Just a few women, mostly in their 60s and 70s. Some had lost their husbands. Others had children who rarely called or never did. They came with hands full of hesitation, saying things like, "I'm not creative," or "I haven't drawn since grade school." I told them the truth. Neither had I. And slowly color returned to them. One painted only flowers, big messy peonies and tiny violets. Another only used one brush and one color and yet somehow created whole worlds. We sat together in silence sometimes, just listening to the scratch of bristles on paper and the click of teacups being set down gently. One woman cried over a landscape of a road she hadn't driven in years. Another painted her mother's kitchen window from memory, complete with the curtains she swore she never liked. I didn't teach them to be artists. I just gave them space to be seen. One morning at the general store in town, I ran into a man I barely recognized. He was a friend of Nathan's, someone I'd met years ago at a birthday party or maybe a school play, one of those pleasant acquaintances whose name you never fully catch. He blinked when he saw me. "Joanne." I nodded a small smile, already bracing for what would follow. "You look, well," he said kindly but surprised. "I am," I said simply. He looked down at his basket, then back at me, awkward. "I don't know if you've heard about Nathan." I tilted my head slightly. "He lost the house last fall. Claire left a few months before that. I guess things just unraveled." I nodded. He looked uneasy, as if expecting something. Shock, outrage, even satisfaction. But I felt none of it. Not pity, not joy, only a deep, quiet understanding that sometimes life doesn't punish, it teaches. And some lessons take longer than others. I walked home that day through the long gravel path to our cottage. Whiskey trotted beside me, his ears bouncing with each slow step. When we reached the porch, I paused and looked out across the lake. No part of me wanted to call Nathan. No part of me wanted to fix anything. But I did for just a moment close my eyes and whisper a small prayer for the children. That wherever they were, they felt safe. That someone was making them pancakes on Saturdays, and that they still remembered how it felt to be loved without condition. Some people believe peace is the absence of noise. I think peace is the absence of needing to be chosen. That evening, I made a pot of lentil soup, and we ate by the fireplace. Gerald read a novel beside me while I worked on a new painting of a rowboat left near the reeds, half sunk but still visible. And as the fire crackled low, I looked around our little home. At the quilt I'd sewn by hand, the shelves lined with glass jars of brushes, the old clock that chimed just a few minutes late, and I knew this wasn't a reward. It was a life I had built. Whiskey snored gently on the rug. Gerald turned a page. And I thought back, just for a moment, to that night so long ago when I stood on a sidewalk with $6 in my pocket and nowhere to go. That night wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. It was the moment the door finally closed behind me. Not with a slam, but with the quiet certainty of a life that no longer asked permission. I stepped away from people who didn't know how to love, and I walked toward myself. That's the thing about closed doors. Most people think they're meant to keep others out, but sometimes they're meant to keep you in, safe, whole, free. The sun began to set beyond the lake, casting a band of copper and rose across the water. I moved to my desk near the window, dipped a brush into ochre, and painted what I saw. Not the colors, but the feeling, the stillness, the belonging. And as I signed my name at the bottom of the page, I whispered to myself, not bitterly but with quiet wonder, the day my son left me standing in the cold with $6 was the day I started to find myself, and I had never once looked back. Thank you for walking this road with me today. If any part of my story touched something deep in you, if you've ever felt overlooked, replaced, or quietly strong in the face of heartbreak, then know you're not alone. Maybe you've been the one left standing in the cold, wondering if you'd ever feel whole again. Or maybe you're just beginning to find your voice after years of silence. Whatever your journey looks like, I'd love to hear it. In the comments below, would you share with me a moment when you realized your worth? A time when you stopped waiting to be chosen and chose yourself instead? Your story might be the exact light someone else needs to hear today. If this story moved you, I hope you'll take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon, so you don't miss the next quiet, powerful story we share here. Because every woman deserves to be heard, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of yourself. You're stronger than you think, Baze.